How's it, Grant here, and I'm so excited to finally get my hands on the Vivo X70 Pro Plus. Everybody's been raving about the camera system on this phone, even though it uses the same hardware as the X60 Pro Plus from last year, except for a slight downgrade in megapixels on the telephoto camera. But the big deal this year is that Vivo has included its custom V1 chipset dedicated to image signal processing. And so all this means is that Vivo now controls the entire stack from the time you take the photo all the way through processing and when you see it. So they don't have to rely on Qualcomm's image signal processing on its Snapdragon chipsets. Now, what better phone to compare the X70 Pro Plus to than the Google Pixel 6 Pro, which has the same 50 megapixel main camera using Samsung's GN1 sensor. And the Pixel 6 Pro starts at about $900 here in the US. And I think the Vivo X70 Pro Plus is about $1,000 to $1,200, depending on which memory configuration you decide to go with. Now, outside the main sensor, the Vivo has a 12 megapixel telephoto lens capable of 2 times optical zoom, an 8 megapixel periscope zoom lens with 5 times optical zoom, and a 48 megapixel ultra-wide-angle camera with gimbal stabilization, meaning it has built-in hardware stabilization on that ultra-wide-angle sensor. It also has a 32 megapixel selfie shooter that is capable of 1080p 30 frames per second video. Now, the odd thing is that the front camera does not have any kind of stabilization, no even software or electronic stabilization on that front camera for video, which I find kind of odd. No matter what settings I tried, no matter what resolution, I couldn't activate any kind of stabilization on that front camera. And of course, the Pixel has its 48 megapixel telephoto lens capable of 4 times optical zoom, along with its 12 megapixel ultra-wide-angle camera and its upgraded 11 megapixel selfie shooter capable of shooting up to 4K 30 frames per second video that is stabilized. Now, before I get on with the rest of the comparison, just a few notes about the Vivo settings that I used. I'm going to show you a few photos in daytime with the full auto settings on the Vivo, as well as the same photo with Zeiss natural color setting turned on. So you can see the difference between that natural color setting versus its full auto setting and how that compares to the colors on the Pixel. Also, the daytime video section is going to be a little bit longer this time because I want to compare the gimbal stabilization on the Vivo's ultra-wide-angle camera to the Pixel. Also, I found a few interesting things about the telephoto lens in video, so I want to shoot some samples of that as well. And lastly, in nighttime, I left the beauty mode on for the night mode on the Vivo, so you can compare what beauty mode looks like compared to with beauty mode turned off on its standard and portrait shots. I warn you though, the beauty mode does look a little bit freaky, but at least get to see what it does and how it looks compared to with it off. So with all that out of the way, go ahead and check out all the photos and videos, and I'm going to come back at the end and let you know what I think. Everyone, so here's a rear video camera test on the Pixel 6 Pro and Vivo X70 Pro Plus. As you can see right there, they are both actively recording from the rear facing cameras right now. This is the ultra wide angle lens on each at 4K 30 frames per second. So I'll just pan around to give you a feel for what these look like here with these ultra wide angle lenses in this particular setting in the park. You can check out how the color reproduction differs and the field of view and everything else. So again, this is the ultra wide angle lens on both these phones right now. So let's go ahead and move into the wide angle. Alright, so this is now the main wide angle lens on each. On the X70 Pro Plus, you cannot continuously record and switch lenses. You have to stop the recording, so that's what I did. And so again, I'll just pan around to give you a feel for how these main lenses look like here. They're both the same GN1 sensor from Samsung right now. And so let's go ahead and pan over here to the right and test zoom there on the cell tower. So let's see if we can get into that 2x telephoto lens on the X70 Pro Plus. And then we can move into a 2x digital here on the Pixel 6 Pro. And let's see if we can move into that 5x lens. I don't think that is. I think that's just 5x digital and not the periscope zoom lens on the X70 Pro Plus. This is the 4x telephoto. You can see it snap in right there on the Pixel. Telephoto lens there on the Pixel there, and how that compares. Now let's go see the max zoom here on the X70 Pro Plus is 10x digital at 4K, and the max zoom here is 20x digital here on the Pixel. But let's back that out to 10x just to see if we can kind of compare what that looks like here on the Pixel. 10x digital on each phone right now. So that's 10x digital and how they compare. Pixel looks a lot clearer, at least in the viewfinder there. So that is 10x, and again, here's max 20x on the Pixel. So let's go ahead and back both these out to the main lens here on each. Let's go to 1x here on the Pixel, and let's go to 1x here on the Vivo. And let's test autofocus here on the post first with the Pixel 6 Pro. So pretty snappy focus and refocus here from the Pixel. So nice snappy autofocus like we've seen it in the past. And one more time here. And let's go ahead with the Vivo now. So Vivo, really snappy autofocus as well here. And nice natural background blur bokeh on both of these. Really large sensors here. And let's go ahead and test stabilization as we walk down the stairs here. So you can see how stabilization looks like here in 4K side by side. Same sensor, but let's see how they do stabilization. And let's go ahead and move a little bit faster here so you can see what that looks like here. And let's pull up here and pan up into the afternoon sunlight so you can see how that handles that really bright sun there. Alright, so this is a quick test of the gimbal stabilization on the X70 Pro Plus up against the standard stabilization that's in the ultra wide angle camera on the Pixel 6 Pro. So I'm just going to jog here to stress out the stabilization and see how they both do. So there's just a quick stabilization test, trying to check out how that works there on the X70 Pro Plus ultra wide angle camera with that gimbal stabilization. Alright, so here's a test of active stabilization on the Pixel 6 Pro and anti-shake stabilization on the X70 Pro Plus. And these are going to be both limited to 1080p 30 frames per second. So let's go ahead and start jogging to see how they look side by side. So there you go, active stabilization on the Pixel and anti-shake on the Vivo. So here's a test at 1080p 30 frames per second, because on the Vivo X70 Pro Plus you can't use either of the telephoto lenses in 4K. Only at 1080p 30, not at 60 frames per second will you be able to use the telephoto lenses in video on the X70 Pro Plus. On the Pixel 6 Pro, what I've noticed is you can't use a telephoto lens at 1080p for some reason. It doesn't switch into that telephoto no matter what I try. On 4K you can clearly see it switch in and pop and totally shift when you hit it. So I'll just do a quick demonstration here. So let's go with the 2x telephoto lens here on the Vivo, and just for fun we'll go to 2x digital to compare that here on the Pixel. And so let's now move into the 5x periscope telephoto lens here on the Vivo. So there you go. That's what that looks like. And let's move into 4x what should be optical telephoto on the Pixel, but you'll notice it doesn't pop in. You can see it usually shifts and you can see it clear up when it switches to that 4x lens in 4K. It does not do that here. So this is all digital right now on the Pixel here at 1080p for whatever reason, but it does give more stabilization because you can notice I'm shaking around a little bit, and it shakes or moves more on the Vivo and it moves a lot less on the Pixel. So you get a lot more hand stabilization here with this digital zoom on the Pixel right now. With the telephoto lens on the Pixel, it'll move around a lot more. There's not as much of that digital stabilization going on. So let's go ahead and move them both back out to 1x here And we'll try one more time in this direction. So let's go ahead again. Let's go 5 times all the way to telephoto here on the Vivo. You can see what that looks like. And let's go to 4 times. Let's see, that's not 4 times. Let's move 4 times here. Let's go back on the Pixel and move into 4 times real quick. There you go. So again, it did not pop in. So, and it's not clearing up. You can still see that digital artifacting on that zoom. But again, it is more stable as I move up and down. You can see the Vivo moving more than the Pixel. So you don't get a telephoto lens, but you do get a little bit more electronic stabilization and handheld stabilization with the zoom on the Pixel. So there's just a quick 1080p test there in video and differences on zoom and what's working and what's not here on each of these cameras at the different resolutions. Everyone, so this will be a front-facing camera test on the Pixel 6 Pro and Vivo X70 Pro Plus. As you can see, they're both actively recording from the front-facing cameras. That's going to be the max resolution and frame rate on each, which is 4K 30 frames per second on the Pixel and 1080p 30 frames per second on the Vivo. Now, Pixel has its speech enhancement feature turned on to reduce the background noise and do all the wind reduction. And on the Vivo X70 Pro Plus, it has an ambient sound mode that is also turned on that should be canceling out some background noise. So check out the audio and how that compares with that turned on each. And so I am in the park in my usual testing spot in some shade. I like to start out in some even light so I can see what the image quality looks like here without any kind of harsh afternoon light. So this is pretty much going to be the very best image quality you can expect in a setting like this. And they both seem to have about the same field of view here on the front facing camera, which is nice and wide, not too cropped. But on the Pixel, you can move into a 1.4 times crop here. So if you want that tighter framing, you can zoom in on the Pixel just like that. Let's move it back here to the standard wide angle mode and move over to some more harsh lights. You can see what I'm talking about here with the direct afternoon light on me. You see how these cameras tend to compensate for that and what the image quality looks like here. Let's go ahead and start panning around so you can see how the image quality changes with the lighting angles change. So right now with the light directly behind me, you can see what that does. The background is a little bit more blown out on the Vivo, but both are doing a very good job of properly exposing me. And I think the Pixel's doing a better overall job exposing the overall image here in this difficult lighting situation. And so we pan all the way back around and we'll start walking to test stabilization so you can see side by side how that compares here on both of these front-facing cameras. So let me know what you think about the front-facing camera on the Pixel 6 Pro and Vivo X70 Pro Plus and how they look here side by side. So here's some rear-facing video from the Pixel 6 Pro and Vivo X70 Pro Plus. This is the ultra-wide-angle camera on each, starting at 4K 30 frames per second. So we'll just pan around to give you a feel for how these ultra-wide-angle cameras compare, the field of view, color reproduction, how bright they get, all that. So again, ultra-wide-angle camera here on both phones, and I'll switch into the main camera right now. So here are the main cameras on both phones. I can't switch between the cameras while recording on the X70 Pro Plus. You can do that on the Pixel 6 Pro. So I had to stop them both and restart the recording here, but I'll pan around with the main lens just like I did with ultra wide to give you a feel for what these cameras look like, how they compare. Looks like, at least in the viewfinder, the Vivo is letting in more light. It's a little bit brighter, and you can see there how it's handling that really bright street light on both phones, both kind of flaring them out a little bit more maybe on the Vivo, but again, a really bright street light there. So let's go ahead and pan over this way and start walking to test stabilization, as well as to move over to a much darker area to see how they handle much more challenging lighting situation. And as always, pay attention to the stabilization. It gets more jittery here in low light. And let's see how the Vivo handles that. It's supposed to be a low light champ. And so let's see how it handles this much darker area compared to the Pixel. The Pixel definitely brightens things up, but at the expense of quite a bit of noise sometimes. And so here we are, much darker in this area here. And in the viewfinder, it looks like the Vivo is brightening things up a little bit more. You can see the night sky is a little bit more purplish blue if I pan up there. You can see what that looks like now, and actually the Vivo compensated very well. At least in the viewfinder, it's much darker, pretty much pitch black, actually darker than what I'm seeing with my own eyes on the Vivo. And the Pixel 6 Pro looks pretty fairly accurate actually. And let's go ahead and pan over this way to the left, where you have a mixed lighting situation. It's dark down this alleyway with some accent lights you can see here. So there's what these phones look like here and how they compare in 4K. And in this situation, in the viewfinder, I'm going to say that the Pixel looks a little bit brighter and a little bit noisier for some reason. So Vivo can brighten things up a little bit more, but also balance out the scene too. So there you go, 4K test on both of these phones. Let me know what you think. So here's some front-facing video from the Pixel 6 Pro and Vivo X70 Pro Plus in some low light. Obviously, we're starting out in a very well-lit situation. I'm going to show you what both these phones can do with some pretty optimal lighting here in a fairly low-lit situation here. And both phones are recording at their highest frame rates and resolutions. So Pixel 6 Pro 4K 30 frames per second, Vivo at 1080p 30 frames per second. Both of them have their kind of speech enhancement or voice enhancement feature turned on, so they should be blocking out as much background noise and wind noise as much as possible here with both phones. So you can compare the audio and what that sounds like here. Both of them seem to have about the same field of view as well, but one thing I did notice after shooting that day video was that the Vivo does not have any stabilization on the front-facing camera. No setting changes can activate any kind of stabilization on the front-facing camera. Changing resolutions, changing different settings will not activate that stabilization mode on the front-facing camera, which is kind of odd to me. So let's go ahead and actually test that stabilization out by walking so you can see what I mean here on both these phones. The Vivo should be looking a lot more shaky than the Pixel. And so we'll also be walking over to a much darker area so we can test out how they handle more challenging light, and as well as testing out these background noise enhancement features on the mics. There's a fountain to my right, so that should be providing some background noise for us to test that microphone quality out against. And we'll pan around this way so you can see the really bright street lights behind me and how the front-facing cameras handle that. And Both doing fairly decently well. The Pixel's brightening everything up a lot more than what I'm seeing with the Vivo though. And let's go back here to this darker area, away from those lights, and see what this looks like here side by side. So Pixel definitely brightened things up a lot more, and it always got a lot of noise and low light from the front-facing camera for some reason. Hopefully Google can address that because it's not a very good look here. So I think that's going to do it. Another camera comparison is in the bag here. So what do you think about the Pixel 6 Pro and the Vivo X70 Pro Plus? A lot of hype around the X70 Pro Plus cameras as well as the Pixel 6 Pro. Everyone's saying that the X70 Pro Plus is a low light champ, and I have to agree. I think it performed very well on low light. During the daytime, I still prefer the Pixel for photos for both rear and front facing cameras. I just prefer that image processing that the Pixel does. If you want a much flatter image, much more natural looking colors though from the Vivo, you can turn on the Zeiss option from the camera and it'll give you a much more flat color profile to your photos. So if you don't like all the over processing, you can always activate that on the Vivo. So if you're into more natural looking photos, you might like the Vivo more. So the other weird thing again is no stabilization from the front facing camera on the Vivo. I think that's kind of odd to omit here, not even electronic stabilization. And also kind of some weirdness with the rear facing cameras and the telephoto lens compatibility. So on the Pixel 6 Pro, you cannot use the 4x telephoto lens in 1080p for some reason. At least I couldn't get it to activate. And on the Vivo, you can't use the telephoto lens in 4K. You can only do so in 1080p 30. So some limitations there to the telephoto lenses and video on both phones. But there's a quick summary and wrap up and what I think about how these phones performed here. So let me know what you think by dropping me a comment. As always, if you have any other questions about either of these phones, I can try to answer. I'll be happy to answer what I can. As always, thanks for watching.